Alright guys, so it's been a month since you guys seen this tank. Got some new plants in. Tank obviously looks like it's still not looking happy. And we have a temporary setup with the UV sterilizer here to clear out the green water. So the algae is blooming in this tank really badly. On the walls, not so much. We have a lot on the driftwood, which is fine. As you can see, the water is actually green. So this is after a 30% water change. I've been doing like a 20-30% water change every week, just kind of get the tank kind of prepped and ready for livestock. So if you're using new soil from ADA, it leaches ammonia like crazy. If you're using an old substrate, it can be like 1 or 2 weeks where it'll still leach a little bit, but it'll cycle pretty fast. But again, this is just really temporary. We have a pump sitting on a rock, so it just doesn't pull in the soil. And it's just going through the UV sterilizer here. It's on and feeding it back. So we'll probably run this for like 1 or 2 days, kill anything that's in the water column. The walls, I'm not too worried about, right? So I can let the algae grow on the wall all day. I'm not too worried about that. I'm more worried about it being just completely green water, because then we don't have any way to filter that out, because we don't have any filters technically in this tank. And luckily I had this UV sterilizer sitting in the garage, really not doing anything, and it's been like set up on the old tank, so I know that it works. I know it's really reliable. The reason why it's kind of like tilted like this versus just like straight up, it actually has a leak right here. So this, I haven't used it in a while, so the seals or something like that has a leak. So just have it tilted this way so that the water would just drop into the tank versus dropping outside, and everything's kind of tilted this way. So again, really like temporary setup. I'll probably only run it during the daytime when I'm here, so I can actually see to make sure nothing's leaking from like way out here or something like that. And I'll just turn it off, and then the next day I'll just turn it back on. But we'll try to run it as long as possible, as much as possible, so that we can get at least the water column to be clear. Once the water column is clear, I think we're good. But I did run a ammonia test yesterday to see what it was, because it was off the charts for weeks. All right, so here are the levels. It's about 0.5, which is really good. Again, that was after a water change in a couple hours, letting the water kind of mix in. 0.5 ppm is really good. We'll probably wait again, probably another week until it gets down to 2.5. I'm guessing maybe a couple of days. And then once the ammonia drops it literally to 0, we're good to go, because everything else, all the other parameters are good. So with my luck, the UV sterilizer I was using, the actual bulb itself died on me. So I was like, oh, I'll just buy a bulb replacement. I saw that the bulb itself was more expensive than just getting like another like smaller UV. So I decided just to get a smaller UV that's actually working, that's not leaking. And it's in water, so this is the green machine. So I picked this up for 30 bucks. The bulb was gonna cost me around $30 to $40 to replace. So I was just like, man, just stick this. It's new, it's working. It's smaller than for the actual tank size, but that's okay, because I can utilize this bulb for tanks outside if something happens as well. So I got this. We're running this right now. The tank is slightly better since I've added fish. I added 1 snail to kind of help with the wall, but mainly it's the green water I'm trying to get rid of. And once this green water is gone, the ruby nose are really nice right now. They're brightened up a lot since quarantine. Some of the plants are looking okay. All right, so we're having a lot of issues in the past 2 weeks. Probably wondering what the heck is hanging here. So I don't have a filter ring in this tank. We just have 2 wave makers, and right now I have Phosphate hanging in this tank. Well, that's because we have high phosphates coming from the tap water. So just really quick here, this is the saltwater tank. So I started noticing a couple things that was really odd. The mushrooms here started to kind of retract a little bit, and then one of my fish, the regal angelfish, just started not wanting to eat. And I noticed that probably 2 weeks ago, and I was just like, well, that's kind of weird. Normally he eats really well. All the other fish was, eating pretty well. And I was just like, what the heck's going on? And noticed, some of the algae on the rocks weren't going away. Some of the corals were not really happy. We got, a lot of pullback on some of the stuff that should be growing, fairly easy, not as hard. So I did some, checks and whatnot. Everything checked out in terms of like alk and all that stuff. But I noticed the phosphate shot off the roof for this tank. And so I did some checks, and I found that the RODI just the RO water itself, just to replenish, was ultra high. It came out to be like 0.4. So every time I was adding water into here to replenish the evaporation, it was like 0.4 added to this tank, causing this to, you know, the phosphates to be extremely high. And I had measured like, you know, phosphate like a week ago, and it was only at 0.05, and I didn't do any changes, you know, ever since, other than a water change with high phosphate plus topping off with high phosphate. Because I'm using RO, you know, water on my saltwater tank, and that's actually filtered through a filter, this tank is only using tap water. So it means the tap water, the phosphate in the tap water was extremely high for whatever reason, like the last 2 weeks. The water actually started tasting a little funky from, you know, the refrigerator, and did some, you know, Googling and noticed that, you know, it's come, a lot of people are actually saying this in the news. So there's something going on with the city water. And so basically phosphate's coming out 0.5 for tap. And then, you know, RO is coming out like at 0.4 after being filtered. So I ended up changing, you know, the filters for the RO to bring it down to only 0.1 even. You know, it's crazy that RO is not removing all of the phosphates from the freaking tap water. So going back to this tank, I've noticed, like, I would say the last like 2-3 weeks as well, algae took off, obviously the light, and I assumed, like, you know, there was nothing wrong with that. But now I'm suspecting that every time I do a water change in here, I'm just supplementing this with high phosphates, and it's fueling the algae growth in this tank. So I'm in a real pickle here where I want to do my water change, just like, you know, a normal 10 to 20% water change, but I'm just going to be adding fuel to this algae that I'm trying to combat. I have PhosGuard going on here to remove as much phosphate as possible to bring it down, so that way the tank can actually consume some of this organics and whatnot. But what I'm thinking right now I need to do is I'm going to do a very small water change, 10%, and I'm going to refill this with RO water, so that way it's like lower phosphate than what it is coming out of the tap, until we can kind of get this under control, and then we can kind of use the tap again once, you know, the city figures out what the heck's going on. But I wanted to show you guys the fish. The fish are in here, the roaming nose. So we have 7 of these guys. Unfortunately, the autos did not make it through quarantine. Yeah, that's crazy, because I had like I had like about 10 of them, and slowly, you know, throughout the quarantine phase, they were just dropping. So I think it was either a bad batch, because I bought all of them from the same source, and I noticed that, you know, a couple of them dropped like flies, like instantly, and they weren't really that healthy when I bought them, but I just kind of rolled the dice on those guys. Unfortunately, they didn't make it, so we'll have to get some more, and then we'll have to do some quarantine on those guys, and hopefully they make it around this time. So for now, all I have in here is a nerite snail that I had just laying around like outside. He's in here helping with the algae. We have one Ammonia shrimp that was sitting outside. I think I have another one outside somewhere, but I couldn't find them. We'll put them in here and help control the algae. But as you can see, the algae on the driftwood itself is gone for the most part. And we also have, you know, the little shrimps in here. We have the mix of painted fire red and blue dreams in here to try to do a cross breed between them. And for the most part, the algae is under control. Now it's just the water being clear. And I'm not too worried about that, because it will clear over time. Once I remove the phosphates here, I'm gonna measure nitrates and see where it's at. If we need to throw in carbon, we can do carbon as well afterwards to remove some of that, to get some of the clarity in here as well. I might end up doing that while this UV is running, because the UV is doing pretty decently, I would say. It's just taking a little while. I have the skimmer over here just to kind of skim the junk on top, and then I kind of like leave it as is. The dalnoids are doing okay. We had some melt back, and then some growth, and then some melt back, but for the most part they're still alive, so that's great. I have a rabbit snail here that was from the outside, threw him in here, and he's just been sleeping ever since. Not doing his job. All right, so here's 24 hours later. I removed the PhosGuard. It removed all the phosphates back down to 0.04. So we're good in terms of that level. I don't really see algae growth on the driftwood itself. I'm gonna let this tank stabilize. I put some carbon in here just to kind of remove any green algae, but I think that this is going to be more of a algae bloom just because the tank is still establishing, right? So we'll let the UV run for another day or so, just in case if there is any floating green algae or algae in the water columns, which I doubt, because right now it's just cloudy, which I think is going to be bacterial bloom, because you can kind of see like the white haziness. And the tank's new, right? We just added livestock. It's just going to go through this, phase of bacterial bloom, because we don't really have a filter. Our main filter is going to be the substrate plus a little bit of pond matrix that kind of fed in between this rock structure here. So it's just going to take some time for it to establish. Once it establishes, it's going to clear up. The algae growth shouldn't grow anymore because we got the phosphate numbers down. The carbon is just going to clear, any impurities in the water, and then I'll remove it afterwards as well. The moral of the story is check your tap water, because sometimes, that could be the issue that's causing your tank to kind of go, bad with, algae or whatever, right? So if you've done everything right and you're like, oh man, what's going on? Check your tap water. If you guys aren't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe, and I'll call you next time, guys. Peace.